Pacman's son, Jimel Pacquiao, is already starting to really get interested to join the fight game. But here is our question. Aside from Jimel, how many second generation Filipino fighters are there? And how many have really made a dent in the fight game? We've listed a few names here, mga kaibigan, and let's run them down with the boxing expert, Mr. Songalia. Ryan, we have a few names here on our list. Of course, let's start off with Luisito Espinosa. Not many people know that his father was a boxer as well. Tell us that story.
Yeah, it came as a surprise to me as well. But because I was actually researching for a school project once, just trying to figure out where all the great Filipino boxers are from, and listening by province. And I realized that Luisito Espinosa was probably like the only one that he listed his residence as being in Manila, because Manila doesn't usually turn out a lot of boxers. I'm like, is he really from Manila? And then I looked where his father was from. His father was from the province, and like, oh, his father was a boxer too. In fact, his father fought maybe the greatest bantamweight of all time, Eder Joffre from Brazil. So his father was no slouch.
Following in the father's footsteps, of course, Luisito made a better name for himself as far as the boxing game is concerned. How do boxers who have like fathers that are boxers as well, how does that figure out? Is the pressure on them really that great? More so if the father was successful.
Well, it depends really, because I think that it matters if they were successful but not too successful, right? So I think the greatest balance between having a father who was a good enough boxer that he had the mindset and the know-how to lead his son would probably be Floyd Mayweather Sr. and Jr. Floyd Mayweather Sr. was a very talented boxer in his own right, but personal problems outside the ring, going to prison, kind of held his career back. So Floyd Jr. didn't have the silk pajamas, so to speak, that can soften up a boxer. But like, it's hard to find great fighters whose children were good boxers or champions as well. I think the only one I could think of that where I could say, okay, this guy, was a world champion, and then his son also became, was Leon Spinks and Corey Spinks, but it's very rare.
Let's now run down more Filipino second generation boxers. We have here in our list Marvin Sonsona, Jimel Magramo. Of course, a lot of people know Jerry and Dodi Boy Peñalosa, who are the sons of Carl Peñalosa Sr. Of course, we just mentioned Jimel Pacquiao, but we'll tackle Jimel Pacquiao a little bit later on as we have this discussion. So with regards to Sonsona, Magramo, and you have a very interesting story about Carl Peñalosa as well as his sons, right, Ryan?
Oh yeah, it's so funny because I'm close with the Peñalosas, and we joke about this sometimes because I would always see Rene Barrientos, the great 130-pound champion, from years past. He's around. He's very active on Facebook. So he fought Carl Peñalosa Sr. twice back in the '60s, and one story that was relayed to me was after their first fight, Carl Peñalosa Sr. was so tight about it that very upset about the decision. He waited in the parking lot afterwards to fight Rene Barrientos on the street, and Barrientos said, listen, we could do this right now, we could fight here for free, or we could come back a month later, do the rematch and get paid for it. So Carl Sr. thought better of it, said, okay, we'll do the rematch. Barrientos beat him in the rematch, but they did get paid. And so I would always tease Jerry about it. Like, hey, Jerry, did Jerry hear about that story? And, he paused for a second and then he smiled. Yeah, I heard about that. So, kind of confirmation there.
Never fight until you're sure you're going to get paid, right?
Yeah, you know what? You guys are professionals. Get that money. You got to pay the bill somehow. Right. Speaking of tough guys in the street, right? Because Marvin Sonsona, was a world champion, won the WBO 115-pound champion. His father, I met his father covering the Pacquiao camps down in General Santos City. Ben Sampson He was a pro from 84 to 89. He had some losses, but none of his losses were ever by knockout. And Marvin Sonsona, very talented fighter in his own right, maybe definitely an underachiever. But when I met his father, I was like, man, his father was the real tough guy of the two. I remember his father kind of like putting him in headlocks and stuff like that, and playing rough with him. Like, Marvin's one of the hardest punching pound for pound fighters that's ever lived in the Philippines. But the father was like not at all. Was like, this is my son.
How about Jimel Magramo, who's active at the moment, Ryan?
Well, actually, I have an interesting story about his father too, Melvin Magramo. So Melvin Magramo fought from 1990 to 2003. Didn't have like the prettiest looking record, but he did have he crossed paths with a great fighter that we mentioned earlier, Manny Pacquiao. When Pacquiao was coming up, they fought in Cebu, and Rick Staheli, who was Pacquiao's trainer at the time, he was telling me a story about how, first of all, there's no video footage of this fight. So this is only like hearsay, but apparently Manny was out on his feet in that fight at one point. He got rocked really hard, got caught cold because Manny wanted to glove up and get to the ring, didn't warm up. In the first round, Magramo catches him with a right hand, and Manny is basically out. Staheli had to do some things to kind of, buy some time for his fighter. I think there was something with involving gloves or something like that. There was a delay, but Manny was basically, he fought the fight, the entire fight on autopilot, out on his feet. So Magramo, a tough character. Doesn't matter what his record is. You get in the ring with him, you know you were in a fight.
We have about a minute or so for this discussion. How much of the sons, or the second generation, were able to really take on the style of the father? How many of them more or less mimic the styles of their fathers?
I would say not so much, actually, because I would say that the next generation, they were, from what I can gather, I haven't seen some of these other fighters, but they were a little bit more scientific. They started in different programs. They had more amateur backgrounds. The sport had changed. It became less about, the brawling style. It was science. Like, you look at Marvin Sonsona. Sonsona was going through all of like the Batang Pinoy, all the different tournaments. The Peñalosa brothers were top amateurs in the country. I think it's very different, but it just shows the evolution of the sport.
Finally, let's have a quick discussion about Jimwell. How do you think Jimwell will be faring? If he really indeed wants to take this seriously, how will he be fighting in the shadow of his, legendary father?
I mean, it'd be very hard to imagine he even comes close, or anyone ever comes close to what Manny does. So it would be tough living in his shadow. But the one thing that I do like about it is that Jimwell seems to really want to fight. So this was not a matter of his father pressuring him to fight. This was, Jimwell was in his room. He had all of his father's fights on his phone, watching his fights. Manny tried to discourage him, but when his son said, "Listen, this is what I want to do," Manny said, "All right, I'm not going to stand in the way of you doing this, but you're going to have to train." I think that there will be a certain point where, if Jimwell gets out of his comfort zone, he's going to go places where people don't care who his father is, and then we're going to have to see. But when I could tell, he's got a pretty good right hand.